there it is. So you can texture a lot of stuff like this really easily. But you're probably wondering, okay, there's got to be more to this than just assigning colors and materials. And there is. Like I showed you, there was a lot of other textures you can use in here. Some of them called procedurals. So let's say I wanted to add a wall here. So I don't know what I have on this scene. I have a bunch of cubes for some reason. So let me just delete some of this stuff so it doesn't get on the way. Just delete this light here that's not doing anything. Okay, so let's say I wanted to assign a texture to this. But I don't want it to just be a plain color. Let's say I make a new texture. So I'm going to right click in here and say assign new material. And say this is probably a wall that's not shiny, so I'm going to select a Lambert. And on the color here, we can assign a file for like a texture, or we can assign one of those procedural maps, which are calculated. It doesn't matter how close or far away you look. They have the same resolution. They're based on a formula here. So all of this are pre-made procedural maps. So I could, for example, select a noise, and that would be hooked up on the color, and it would take me right to the noise, and I would see the noise on my box here. And if you click on this button up here, it takes you to where we came from. So file, like the outputs of that material, and this is also inputs for that material. So if I click in here, I'll be back to my original material. It's showing me here on the color is grayed out. It's saying you have something hooked up in here, so you can't change the color here. You hooked up one of those files, one of those procedural maps. So the procedural map is not set like this. You can change it. You can't change the settings for it. You can't change the colors too. So you can come up with your own things here. Let's say I want some weird colors. I don't know really what I'm doing here, what colors I'm picking, but I'm just gonna pick random colors so you can see how this is changing. So with this type of material, you just have to play with the sliders here and see what they do. The time will animate the texture and time. Frequency is how much it repeats. So you can get different variations here. So let's go back to the original material by hitting on the outputs. So here's my original material. Let's say I don't like this. Let's say, oh, I was trying to make concrete, but it looks like pink flowers or something. So we can always get rid of this connection here. We can right click on the color name here and say break connection. So just like that, that color, the connection that was going to the color is gone. So let's see what else we can do here with those procedural materials here. So I'm going to click on the color again. Usually you'll end up adding a file, download a texture from online, but you can make something from scratch. Let's say I wanted a ramp in here. Now ramp is just another name for a gradient. So now I have a gradient here. It is going in the V direction, which is, remember, U and V, so up and down, and I can kind of see it in here, but it looks like it's only affecting 2 sides instead of all 3 sides. So this is because there's no UVs on this box. So a lot of the time, if you don't have UVs, you'll get weird results with your procedural textures. So there's a couple things you can do. The first one would be the longest taking one, would be UV in your object by hand. The second one would be, instead, let's break this connection here. Break connection. There is some of the maps here that can be applied 3D. So most of them are 2D, but if you look in here, there's 3D textures that will try to conform to the shape. So all of this will try to apply in 3D. Let's say we put this granite in here. So see, the granite is not disappearing on one face like it was the 2D texture. So this one can, because it's a 3D texture, can kind of conform to the object. But let's go back here, and let's say I don't want to use one of these 3D textures. I just want to use one of the 2D ones. So I'm going to break the connection here, and I'm going to say, instead of, I don't want to do UVs, that takes too long. I'm just going to say, Maya, please do them for me, automatic. So we're going to say automatic UVs. So Maya is going to do its best to make the best UVs it can. We're going to say Q to get out of automatic UVs. And then we're going to try it again. So let's go back to the material here. Let me select the object and go back to the material and change the color here. So we'll say I want to add a gradient again. Let's see how that gradient is working now. If it is working, it should be working because we're using UVs now. So it is working. Let's say we want it to go on the side to side direction. We can say go on the U direction. So that changes it side to side and up and down. And we can change what type of gradient it is. So right now is linear. You know, you have smooth, bump, spike, and they'll look a little bit different depending on what you pick. I'm going to pick linear and just move these colors around, and you'll see how it's changing. So let's say I come and make these two colors really close in here. You'll see I get this line in here. You can add other colors. If you click on the gradient here, you'll get another color here, and the swatch for that color that you have selected is down here. So let's say green so we can see it. So now we can see the green. We can make the white come up, maybe move the green over a bit. You know, so now you don't have a plain color on the wall, you have a gradient, and you can add as many colors as you want. Other things you can do, let's say we change the order of this, so like this, and let's say this color is kind of like, let's say this is like Adobe or stucco or something like that. So let's look for brown here and change it like this. Then make the line a little more sharp. So this gradient line, you can add noise to it with this slider here. So if I add noise to it, you'll see it's adding noise to the transition here. So it's distorting it, but the frequency of the noise is too big. So we can make it smaller here. Let's see. There we go. And maybe that noise is too wide here. So, you know, we can slowly start getting what we want here. We just have to play with the sliders a bit till we find what we want. See what this does. UV wave. I don't know what every single slider does because I honestly haven't played with all of them. There's so many textures that are pre-made, like these procedurals, that I haven't played with all of their their sliders. You'll have to experiment with them, but you know, you can get some interesting results with this. You know, kind of like rusting paint or falling off paint, flecking off. So that's not all you can do. So let's say you wanted to, instead of using this, you wanted to put pictures on places you want to have reflection. So let me go back to the original material here, and in here I'm just going to leave the plain color so you can see what's going on here. So I'm going to break the connection and I'm just going to add a plain color. So if you look on the swatches here, usually the last colors you use are still in there. So it's just a plain color now. So if you look in here, all these checker boxes have, you can add a file to each one of these or one of those procedural textures. So let's say just like you added to a bump map to the road in here, I could, you know, add some noise to make some bumpiness to that box. Let's see, where's simplex noise? Let's see what that one does. So that's pretty strong. And the first window that changes here is how much is bumping out. So we can adjust it here, go smaller, not so big. I'm actually on the negative side there. So the bump is just simulating bumpiness. If you see, it's not changing really the edge of your object, it's just flat. But it looks like it will behave like with light. It will behave like there's a bump in there with light and shadow. And there's actually a second version of bump maps, which is called normal maps, which react better to light and cast shadows better, reflect light better. So if I want to modify that bump, I just have to go here to the bump values, showing me there's a file connected there, so I can click on it. Here's my bump. I can adjust it here, make the scale bigger or smaller, you know, change the amplitude and all those things that you would like to play with. You can combine more than one material in an object, and I'm going to show you how those things work here. But you're probably wondering, okay, I've made so many materials, I don't even know how many I have or where they are. So if you look up here, this little blue box is where all the materials are hiding. So I'm going to click on it, and this is going to show up. This is our hypershade. So again, you just click on this little blue sphere here, or you can go Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade, and this window will show up. And you're saying, oh no, another window. Whoops, I accidentally snapped it here. Oh, here it is. Just need to grab the tab off. Okay, so you're probably wondering, okay, I have so many menus now. I have one more window with a bunch of menus on it. So this is basically, this side is just like when you created a new material and it showed up and it asked you what material you want. You want a blend that has a bit of fuzzy reflection like plastic, and an isotropic that has a strong reflection or highlight, which is called specular in 3D, but it's kind of distorted like if it was metal, or a Fong, you know. So you pick this just like you go to the store and pick, I want gloss paint or semi-gloss paint or matte paint. And so this is like your box of paints. And this other stuff is, this window is listing all your materials that you have created. So anything I've created is going to be listed here, starting with Lumber 1. Lumber 1 is the gray that you see when you're creating things. So anything you create will have Lumber 1 assigned to it by default. So when you assign a new material to it, it gets changed from Lumber 1 to whatever you create. So again, the Hypershade is just like your painter's palette. You know, this is your box of paints. As soon as you select one box of paint, let's say I select a blend, like as soon as I click on it, it will show up in my palette. There it is, blend 5. Over here on the bottom right, I can change the color of it, adjust it, you know, make it transparent or add incandescence to it. So again, it's just like a painter's palette. You know, down here, this is the node editor I'll talk to you about in a second. But by the way, talking about painter's palette, this is me dressed as Bob Ross and my wife as the happy little tree. So if I select my suit blue in here, there's my materials giving me a preview in here on this window, and I can pick what kind of preview object is showing here. So I can display my material in a box and a cloth, or you know, on hair. I don't know why I would put a blend on hair. I just used it because you know, it's plastic is kind of shiny, but it's probably not this shiny. So if you look down here, you have settings for this material. So this is a little bit better than going to store and buying gloss paint, because if you look, the specular, which is this highlights on it, are pretty strong. It's almost too reflective. And if you look down here, here's a color. Here's how transparent the material is, so I can make it transparent. How much of the ambient color it takes, and right now it's saying the ambient color is black. We could assign a color here to the ambient. Let's say the ambient is red. Whoops. And you see kind of it takes on that color. So let me just get rid of it. I can go all the way to white. But it's kind of too reflective. Plastic is reflective, but not this shiny or polished. So if you look down here on the specular shading, so speculars are these highlights you see on the ball. We can turn down the reflectivity, and it'll be less reflective. Also, the specular color is what color are those highlights. So if I change it here, you'll see it right away. So let's make it pink. So this is how much specularity there is on it. So I can turn it down all the way to black, so there's no reflectivity on it. I can also make the eccentricities how fuzzy that reflection is, or how glossy the surface is. So with the new materials, you will hear glossiness or roughness, or yeah, glossiness or roughness. You'll hear the same thing. Then specular eccentricity here. Specular roll-off, it kind of affects the size of your specular highlights. So now my material is more, it's looking more like plastic, you know, not so shiny as before. Now I would have to probably adjust my materials on the other things, like on the box here. But on the front, you know, so it's the same, because I have a different material on the front here where I have my drawing. I made a new blend here for the arms and the legs, but you see it looks more like plastic. So to see a clear representation of your materials, you know, ideally you have two things. One is our preview render window, which is the Arnold render view. So we're going to open Arnold, say open Arnold render view, and hit play. And if you see black, it means you don't have any lights. I do have that light. I guess I made that mesh light. I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to use let's just use a physical sky here, so it's a little bit easier to see. So now I can let me just rotate the sky a little bit. It's kind of casting shadows here. So you can see how much reflective the chest is compared to the arms and the rest of the suit. And the image is pretty dark, actually. That's because the sun is... So if I adjust it here, this will not save when you render, by the way, this exposure here. So I just want a little more light, so I'm going to make my physical sky a little brighter. I'm gonna turn to 0 the exposure here. And I'm going to pick the physical sky and maybe increase the intensity of it. There we go. Maybe rotate it so you know have shadows casting on my object. Oops, the other way. There we go. So if you look, let me zoom in. I have to zoom in on the... You have to zoom in on this view for the render preview window to change. So you see my arms here look like plastic. It's not as reflective anymore, but the chest is still pretty darn reflective. So I gotta select this. This is the one that had my drawing on it, so I call it torso and head. So I'm going to come here and adjust the same thing. So I turn down the eccentricity here, reflectivity I turn it to 0. So you see it's less reflective now. It still has the specular there. I think I changed the specular roll off also a bit, so it wasn't as defined. We'll call that good. So now it's not as reflective as it was before. So with this window, you can preview pretty much anything. I think I showed it to you with lights. You can also turn it on in here on this viewport. If you go renderer and change Arnold, and you'll see this window, the same thing. You just hit
what
play.
else can we do with materials?
Here.
Materials.
So now you can move around and
show you here. So if you think
wait
about
for
this
Maya
as
to
your palette,
update
let's
the
add an
preview
item here.
If your computer can handle it, you know, if your computer cannot handle it,
something
it might explode on you. So just use the open Arnold render view.
Add it by right clicking.
It's actually a little bit better because you don't see the selection,
right? So you right click
highlights.
and hold.
You know, that's kind of annoying sometimes.
Assign existing material.
But anyway, let's see what other materials there is
right
here.
Or you can drag it right from your hypershed, just like if you were painting. You know, you just click and hold on the middle mouse button and drag it into your object. Let me just change the color of the blend here so you can see that it actually did change the color. So there it is. Oh, and I added to the wrong thing. It's a good thing that I changed the color here. So let me just change the floor back to lumber 1. Oh, I changed lumber 1. That's the problem. I didn't change blend 5. So let me change, and this may happen to you. You might accidentally change lumber 1. That's really easy. You just go back to black and then turn it back to gray. I mean, it's really easy to fix. but I wanted to add blend 5 to my object, so I'm going to grab let's change the color first so we can see it changing. So there it is, it's just pink. I'm going to middle mouse, hold and drag over to my object here. Let's see if I can make it this time. There it is. Or you can also have an object selected, go to the hypershade and right click on the material you want and say assign material to selection. Or you might have one material in a bunch of things, and that's a good way to select things also. You can say I have this material, what objects have this material on it? You can right click on the material and say select objects with material. So Maya will select only the objects that have that blend assigned to it. So what else can I do with my materials? So if we look down here, let me just make this window a little bit bigger. We added a picture to our torso and our head by just clicking on the checker box. But as you see in here, and let me just change these back to gray. So I'm going to go back to black and up to gray, so it goes back to gray. If you see, every property pretty much has one of those checker boxes by it. So it's a good time that we talk about maps. So maps are just files that have information. When you think about maps, you probably think about, oh, this shows me landmarks. And that's exactly what you're doing in here. So you, with your color, you're showing landmarks on the U and V direction where things go. So I could do the same here in transparency. I could click on the checker box and add a map to it. And I could add any of these maps from here. Let's say I add a checker map. As soon as that happens, you'll see the map is showing transparency in here. So on the parts where there's black, is transparent, and the parts where it's white is solid. So technically you're just showing Maya, I want these landmarks to be, the white ones to be solid and the black ones to be black. And you don't necessarily need to be, so let me go back here to my material. Where did it go? Blend 5. Let me just break the connection to transparency. So you can make your own maps. So I'm going to break this connection. You don't necessarily need to be using a procedural map. So let's say I made this really simple painting here. And let's say this is the map I want. I want to show Maya where to be transparent and where to not be transparent. So I'm going to load this file on my transparency here. And you know, that's basically painting landmarks. So if you think about it, this is the U direction and the V directions up and down. So just like when we laid our UVs, I'm telling it where to show transparency and where to be solid. So I'm going to load that map here, my transparency. I just put it on my desktop so I could show you this. So as soon as I click on the checker box, this is gonna change and say, where's your file? So my desktop, map test, and there it is. If you click on it once, it'll show you a preview. Now the transparency should be on those objects. And because I painted my whole object black, let's see if I can rotate this. Because I painted my whole object black, you know, and I left those parts white, you know, those are showing, and the rest of it is not showing. So I could invert it too. Let's say, so let's click on the map here, or the where the file's connected, and go down to the file attributes. Maybe I need to click on if you look at Blend 5 here and go through the connection, you might want to see, okay, where was that node that I can adjust the bumpiness, how much it bumps out, and it's not showing up in here. That's where our node view comes in handy. So if I select a material here, I can't select this input and output connection, or I can right click on the material itself and say graph network, and that's going to clear my node editor and show me just that one material that I have. So in here, showing me the material, there's Blend 5. Here's that node that I was looking for to adjust the bumpiness. So let me just make the window smaller. And in here you can navigate just like you navigate the viewport. So here's my bump, how much it bumps out, bump depth. You can move the slider out or back. If you had a normal map, you could select normal map from here. And I will talk about normal maps here in a bit. But it's basically like the second an upgrade from the bump map. Bump maps have been around forever. So here's my material again. Here's how much it bumps. If I click and keep going here through the nodes, here's the file that I used. It's showing me, you know, visually here I can see everything that's connected to it. And here's how that file is placed on the sphere here. So if I want to change how it's displayed, let's say I want it to repeat in here, I could say repeat this file, let's say 3 times on the ball. So I can say 3 times side to side on the U direction. See, it's starting to repeat already. 3 times on the up and down direction, and the file's now repeating. Let's say 10 times so we can see it more. 10 times and 10 times. So now I can see it repeating. Let's go back to 1 in here so you can see what else it can do here. Okay, so over here is it's covering the whole bowl. Let's say I don't want to cover the whole bowl. We can say cover half the bowl instead of the whole bowl. You know, so you can play with this and adjust your textures if you want. This is easier to do with your UVs, but you can adjust here things like repetition, maybe offset it, maybe rotate, you know, the picture a little bit. So there is some play still. Offset on one direction or the other. So there is you can mirror the image too. Didn't seem to do much on the U direction or V direction, but if you're looking for to see everything that's connected, let's say we have another picture on the color. Let's just so you can see it more visually. I'm just gonna put the same file on it, so you can see what the hypershade does and how it shows you things at a glance instead of having to navigate through menus. You know, you can see it all at once. So now that same file is on the color, and you could have a different file, but see, it's showing me all the connections that are going to this material, which is pretty handy because you can navigate through your nodes pretty fast instead of having to you know, go here on the attribute editor and click this button and hope you get to the right window. You know, in here you can do it really fast with at a glance. Let's say my file, my texture is just a little bit off, you know, it's not matching, it's smaller. I could come here to place 2D texture and, you know, adjust it a little bit. So the node editor is really handy to visualize things.